Hello, dear friend. Thank you for hanging out with a couple of multiples today. We are your hosts, Drew
and Garden System. We are a married couple that both have dissociative identity disorder, or DID.
Our lives are both ordinary and uniquely complex. Perhaps you were introduced to DID in a movie or TV show, or maybe you have been diagnosed with the disorder, or you are a therapist that wants to learn more about working with a client that has it.
Whatever the case may be, we are glad you are here to learn all about relationships with friends, family, and significant others. Attachment can be complicated when you are more than one inside of yourself. You are making a difference by choosing to listen to this podcast today because developing and maintaining relationships is key to the healing process. For many, the therapeutic relationship may be the first secure attachment ever.
You can help dispel myths about DID and help spread awareness by sharing this podcast with a friend or loved one. Please visit acoupleofmultiples.com. Together, we can make a difference by building healthy relationships. Hello there, and thank you for tuning in to this intimate 6th episode with Drew
and Garden System,
a couple of multiples.
As you learned from our previous episodes, we are a married couple that were both diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, or DID. We both have systems with multiple parts that have had to learn how to navigate a multitude of relationships, including family, friends, and romantic partners.
Trying to maintain these various relationships can get tricky when you're a multiple because your relationships involve all of yous and the other person. Each of yous might have different attachment styles, different love languages, and just different preferences for company.
As if that wasn't complicated enough, it can get even more complex when multiples try to be friends or romantic partners with another multiple. It is layers upon layers of attachments, needs, desires, and trauma triggers. Oh, where do we begin?
This is going to be fun. I'm excited. Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start.
The sound of music. Okay. The beginning really starts before we are even born. There are so many numerous factors that affect the physical and emotional well-being of a person, and some of them are genetic, and some of them are related to our own mother's physical and emotional well-being while we were still developing during her pregnancy. Our development is heavily influenced by events that occurred before we were even born.
Yes, thinking about the emotional and physical state my mom was in while pregnant, yeah, she had it rough. She was 21 when she got pregnant with me and found out she had cancer. The story goes that the doctors recommended to her that she have an abortion so they could start her cancer treatments. But she refused because she really wanted to have me and didn't know if she'd be able to get pregnant again after treatments. She told the doctors that when her chances and my chances of survival were the same, then they could take me. Her chances got worse and mine got better. We've both lived, and she has since beat cancer multiple times. I think about the stress she must have felt being sick and at one point not believing she was going to make it when she was pregnant. Also, I think about the unresolved intergenerational trauma looming in the background of it all. My mom had been through so much up until that point, and in retrospect, I know her mental, emotional state, plus the intergenerational trauma, definitely affected me and my development.
It might feel like a stretch to pull together intergenerational trauma in this way, but there is quite a bit of research to back up how events that happened to our parents and even our grandparents affect us now and our children. It affected our development and our attachments to other people. When I was born, my parents' golden retrievers gave birth to 11 puppies. Several of these puppies had to be bottle fed. And my brother would rather bottle feed me and let my mom deal with the puppies instead. This might seem like a minor thing, but it certainly influenced the bond I had with my brother versus my mother. Most kids' first word is either mama or dada, But my first word was my brother's name. For years, it was just this cute story they told. But I do think it speaks volumes about what sort of attention was given to me as an infant.
One of the first things that should start happening right away after a child is born is for baby to start forming a secure attachment to a caregiver. However, if mom or caregiver is not consistent, attentive, or nurturing, providing for baby's needs, a secure attachment won't form.
The first couple of years are really crucial. Psychosocial theory identifies trust as the first developmental milestone that needs to be achieved, and trust is certainly an important foundation for all our relationships. When I can't trust my primary caregiver, which for us was our mother, we cannot develop a secure attachment. On one hand, we had no reticence for strangers. We would run right up to them, hug them, and tell them we loved them. We were never concerned about checking back in with our mother like most toddlers would do. On the other hand, we were extremely anxious about attachments as a child. We were overly clingy and could not handle goodbyes. We used to stand at the end of our driveway with our hands outstretched and screaming bloody murder every time our aunt left after visiting.
Some people might try to label the child as needy or insecure, but there is always a reason behind behavior. It isn't just the way the child is. When I was a young child, I developed severe anxiety. I did not feel safe in my home. I did not feel safe enough to sleep. I did not feel safe outside of my home either. I became hypervigilant. I did not trust the adults around me to keep me safe. I also started to blame the negative I was feeling on myself. It was my fault. If I was better, then it wouldn't be this way. By the time I was 3 or 4, I was hitting, biting, and scratching myself and repeatedly banging my head against the walls. I felt such hatred for me.
You know, children just don't have the capacity to comprehend what is happening to them at such young ages. When caregivers fail to bond, care for, or love their children, the children automatically take responsibility for the negative behaviors of their caregivers. There must be something wrong with me. I am bad. It is my fault my caregivers don't love me. And they do start hating themselves. And this negative self-view just festers over time and affects all our future relationships.
It was something I was told directly too, which further broke my heart. If you adjust, then I wouldn't have to. A good daughter would. You will never be good enough is the message that was received. And if you were better, then this wouldn't be happening. You are bad.
One of our earliest memories of sexual abuse ended with this feeling and belief that I was bad. I didn't understand what had just happened, but I understood I was being punished. There was this belief that I brought this on myself and that I deserved to be hurt. If I was so bad and so unloved by people that were supposed to keep us safe, who then could we ever trust or connect with or form any sort of attachment to? And then, to make it all the more confusing, we were constantly told how much we were loved and how spoiled we were and that we just needed to be more grateful. It was really a toxic cocktail of confusion to really mess with how we formed attachments with friends and significant others when we grew older.
Yes, and for me, the consistency of the instability and the repetitiveness of feelings of I'm not safe led to the very early creation of parts of myself to compartmentalize the severity of it all. There had to be parts of me that did not fear death to survive. There had to be parts of me that were okay, even made for the sexual abuse that was going on. There were parts of me that were fighters so that we could try to defend ourselves from these adult perpetrators. I didn't sit there and think up a game plan. The parts happened out of necessity to survive. At some points in life, DID doesn't feel like a superpower. But I'd like to argue that during childhood or in the midst of horrid situations that no one should ever have to endure, that this coping mechanism is top notch. I would not be here to tell you my story today if I hadn't developed parts that made living possible.
Exactly. Having parts is what helped us hold the duality of all the things we experienced. As infants, we must attach to our caregivers, so we must separate the good from the bad. One part knows that abuse and one part does not. That is essentially why Keeler and Victoria existed opposite of each other in our first marriage. We're jumping a little bit ahead, but it is a great example of how this works. Victoria was unaware of our ex-husband's abusive behaviors. She didn't remember the snide remarks or him punching the wall. It was how we were able to stay amid some of the horrific things that happened. With her fronting, we didn't know horrific things were happening. We were able to keep up a facade of the perfect little family at church and with our in-laws. Yet it wasn't really safe for us or our children to stay, and that was what Keeler knew. She knew we needed protection from him and sought ways to leave. She would also be the one to stand up to him verbally. Keeler held the knowledge of the abuse so Victoria could stay married. Victoria was too terrified of going to hell to face the truth that we needed to leave. She knows now that she's not going to hell, but she didn't know it then. Having these two parts was how we could stay attached to our ex-husband because we believed that we needed him to survive. And this is what young children do. They have to attach to their caregiver so they can't know that their caregiver is neglectful or harmful. That knowledge gets compartmentalized and tucked away.
And a lot of families that have a history of intergenerational trauma might have many family members that are operating with a system of parts or dissociate in some capacity, which makes things that much more complex. I, too, had parts of myself that were unaware of the trauma. These were the parts of myself that were able to still see themselves as good, and they interacted with the, quote, good parts of my mom. In retrospect, I do believe my mom also had and still has parts, just never formally diagnosed. These good parts of her made me lunches and went to PTA meetings and was a positive face in the community. The good parts of myself were out when the good parts of herself were also out. They remained in happy oblivion to what was going on. When my mom switched and bad things would happen, it would also trigger me to switch to compartmentalize the trauma away from the other parts that needed to function like everything was normal to keep the secrets hidden. And like Garden System was saying, this way of dealing with trauma that may occur in other future relationships continues because of the way this initial attachment developed in the very beginning with mom or the main caregiver.
This compartmentalization can really affect how we develop friendships and romantic partners in our future, much like we described with Victoria and Keeler. Looking back on my friendships that I had growing up, I can recognize some of the attachment distortions that we had with others. I used to be so strongly attached to friends and could not see or recognize behaviors from them that others might identify as red flags. What we really had going on was super young parts were latching on to any shred of kindness shown to us. These young parts were desperately searching for some kind of maternal figure anywhere that they could. If their feelings ended up getting hurt due to perceived or actual abandonment, our teen part, Maisie, would front with an attitude. Maisie can't stand it when the littles get hurt or upset and start to cry, and she will front to deal with whomever or whatever is upsetting them. She'll also front to tell someone off if she thinks they are overstepping their boundaries and telling the littles what to do. Friends, family, and even the therapist might accidentally step into a caretaker role with the littles and think that they have to act as a parent. Maisie will quickly step in to shut that down. Littles might look vulnerable when they front and want to play or engage with others, but they are not alone. Protector parts are right there watching. It is Maisie's job to take care of our littles, and she does not like anyone else trying to usurp her role. She's cool with others interacting and playing or talking, but not with telling them what to do. She wants the littles to experience kindness from others.
And it's more than just kindness that children look for in others when they do not have a secure attachment from the start. They look for others to validate that they are good, that they are enough. If they are treated kindly by someone, to them, this might mean that they are doing something deserving of the kindness. They will try to figure out what they are doing that is deserving of being treated the way they want to be treated. Instead of understanding that they are loved for who they are, they try to change or mold themselves into something someone else wants or will love. This further annihilates the child from themselves and causes the early fawning response, trying to figure out what others want and being that way.
Ah, yes, the fawn response. Doing whatever will please others to avoid being hurt. This response shows up in so many places throughout life. It also shows up in the therapy room big time. We are very conditioned to worry about what others think of us from a very early age, and having a traumatic childhood only deepens this. Being told that someone will come and take you away because you're making mom or dad look bad can be terrifying. We very quickly learn to put on a mask and hide all of the bad things because we were told we don't know how good we have it and it must be absolutely awful out there. We learn to walk on eggshells to prevent upsetting others, to avoid being yelled at or punished. When we finally made it to adulthood and into therapy to try and heal from our traumas, we still continued to do the fawn response thing. We had to be a good patient, so our therapist would continue to see us and not refer us out. We worried about our therapist and whether or not her interventions were successful. We had to be the good patient that gets better so our therapist's self-esteem won't plummet. We don't want them feeling bad if we don't get better, so we'll pretend we are getting better, even when we're not.
Yes, and it can also be the opposite. We don't want to appear to be getting better because we never want to, quote, graduate from therapy and never see our beloved therapist again. Therapy and the therapeutic relationship is often the first relationship that could introduce unconditional positive regard, being accepted and shown kindness without conditions, and also the first time clear and positive boundaries are set. This environment provides the client with the opportunity to form a secure attachment to the therapist and then be able to go out into the world and form secure, healthy attachments and relationships with others. This does assume that the therapist knows what healthy, firm boundaries are and can provide stability and reliability that the client needs in order to help repair these early attachment wounds. My own therapist's ability to provide boundaries, be reliable, and show that it didn't matter what I said or did, she would not quit being there for me, eventually led to me not needing her in the ways I did at the beginning. Over time, I knew what she would say if I contacted her because I internalized her messages. I could pull them up and hear her saying them in my head, and in this way, I was able to develop the ability to comfort myself without the need to contact her. When you form a secure attachment, you know that that person is there for you, and you know what they would say, and you know that they will answer if you were to reach out. You don't have to question it anymore. In this sense, you are able to use what you learned and form healthy attachments in other relationships.
Receiving consistent messages is so essential in therapy. Growing up, we weren't always sure how others would respond to us, but we know exactly how our therapist will respond to us. Therapeutic boundaries can be a bit of a hot topic, and each therapist will have different boundaries with their clients, but the therapist's ability to be flexible and to hold boundaries is super essential for working with those of us that have dissociative identity disorder. Being so rigid as to not allow any contact whatsoever between sessions is just as unhealthy as super loose boundaries when the therapist is at the beck and call of their client. With the technology that we have available, there are ample ways for appropriate connections that help clients heal. Being allowed to email and even text helped us get through so many crises in the beginning of our trauma work. We were never reprimanded or told we were having too much contact. There was always a kind response, even if it was simply, "Thank you for sharing. We can discuss further at our next session." Just having that acknowledgement helps repair all the wounds of neglect. We were noticed and we were not ignored. We mattered. Learning that I could count on my therapist is what helped me and all of my parts find security in our therapeutic relationship.
Yes, and one of the challenges of therapy for a client with a system of parts is the willingness and ability of the therapist to get to know everyone, meaning all parts are important and all parts hold information that make up the whole picture. So it is our very strong opinion that therapists talk to all the parts that are willing, not just one. And that requires time and patience. Parts are different from one another and have different attachment experiences. Sometimes a part or two will talk during a session, but another one will not have gotten a chance, which makes communicating between sessions sometimes necessary to gather all the needed information. And like Garden System said, it's more about being heard than it is about the therapist taking time between sessions to respond to emails or texts fully. Simply saying, "Thank you, I received this, let's talk when I see you next," is enough for someone to feel seen and heard.
This is so important for singletons, singlets, people who don't identify as a multiple, to understand about multiples. You don't have a relationship with just one of us. You have to build a relationship with each of us. This became so apparent in our own therapy with our own therapist. Daisy was the first to form an attachment with our therapist and was happy to come out and tell her anything and everything. Adults in our system also developed a sense of trust and were willing to explore topics with her. Yet, every now and then, we felt stymied. Someone inside was preventing us from talking, preventing certain parts from fronting, and it felt like we had just hit a wall and could not make progress. It took some time and a lot of internal exploration to figure out that Jenny was the one blocking interactions with our therapist. It is how we figured out she was our gatekeeper. Jenny had not been out enough to develop any sort of trust or relationship with our therapist, and she did not feel safe enough to allow any of us to explore certain topics in session. Our therapist had to talk directly to Jenny and work with her to build trust and to establish a relationship with her. For our therapists listening, we know that there are a lot of teachings out there that discourage you from working directly with parts, and we believe that is a very harmful teaching. You cannot give us DID by talking directly to parts. You cannot make us split further or hurt us further by talking directly to parts. Talking directly to parts and working with them individually and with the system as a whole is what makes the most progress. We plan to put together a workshop to help you do just that in your therapy practice. We hear from our friends in the DID community far too often that their therapist won't talk to their parts and see firsthand the negative consequences of this. It is okay to talk to all of us.
In fact, we see it as necessary. Garden System just gave us a great example from her own therapy, how it was therapy with all of her parts, not just one, and how there wouldn't have been any progress or healing had her therapist just talked to Daisy or just talked to one of her adult parts. If a therapist doesn't talk to parts, the trauma will stay hidden, and years of therapy will be spent on trying to manage symptoms instead of getting to the root of the issues. So, how does this look outside of the therapy room? When you are a family member or a friend of a multiple, or you embark on a romantic relationship with a multiple? How does this work when there are many parts in a system? Well, we already touched a little on how this might look or be within a family. If there is intergenerational trauma, multiple family members might have parts, some of which are out at the same time to either hide the trauma or be there when things are traumatic. If a multiple experiences trauma outside of their home, what can that look like? I know that was Garden System's situation, so maybe you can speak into that a little bit.
Right. My main traumas did not occur within my nuclear family, within my nuclear family, or in our family's home. Yet we did develop a particular part that was for our family. Growing up, most of the time, we needed her to front to handle interactions with our immediate family. We didn't realize at the time that's what we were doing. We just knew we had to be a certain way around them. There was this expectation that I had such a great life and needed to be happy, and that my parents' happiness was dependent upon my own happiness. So we had a part developed to encompass happiness and people-pleasing skills to match my parents' expectations. Maybe if they had known what had really happened to us, they would have behaved differently or had different expectations for us. I remember distinctly this one time my father was angry and he started to raise his voice, and suddenly we were cowering on the floor and he was so confused and literally asked us why we were acting like we were afraid he was going to hurt us. It was just an instinctive reaction, even though we didn't fear him specifically.
For me too, I knew that the outward appearance of our family was very important. I had parts that were happy, carefree, and believed we had a good home life because that is all they knew. These parts of me being out when other people were around was important to keeping our family image. But as soon as I started seeing signs of my mom switching, I did too. Those parts couldn't be there for the not good times. I remember my dad trying to stop my mom from switching, even though he didn't know what was really happening or have words for it. He would call her name and be like, "Come on now." But by that time, it was already too late. I think he went numb and had traumatic responses too. He was a Vietnam vet and had PTSD from the war, so he had trauma responses to the verbal and physical abuse. The few times he would try to stop her, she would start hurting him as well, which sometimes had my protective parts popping out to try to get her to stop. I couldn't handle seeing her hurt him. My dad used to tell me things to do to try to ease her rage, like, go hug your mom, go bring her this food, go tell her you're sorry. And although he was trying to help, he really wasn't. I wish the whole time that he could stop her, but I think he was afraid of her too.
I'm reminded of how my dad would always say, "That's just your mother," as if that somehow excused the behavior. That's just who she was, and we had to learn to deal with it. Except it is not the responsibility of children to make their parents feel better. It is not the child's responsibility to regulate the emotions of their parents. Yet we carried this burden. We learned how to keep our heads low and to stay out of their way. And that meant we were often alone and had no examples of how to regulate our own emotions. And as we grew, we found ourselves stuck with multiple selves at different levels of development and unable to manage the multiple emotions erupting from multiple parts of ourselves. And as a result, it was extremely difficult to establish friendships and relationships outside the home. Middle school and most of high school were some pretty lonely years for us. We managed to find a small group of friends our senior year, but then we were off to college and struggling to make new friends in a whole new state. When I remember certain interactions we had with fellow classmates in college, we realized that we were switching a lot around them. Our littles were popping up all over the place and trying to make friends. Most people tried to avoid us or ignore us, and we very quickly realized that we were extremely needy and clingy, but we just didn't know how to stop. We didn't understand that we were a we and that we had littles and that they had needs. We just often felt so desperate and alone.
I often felt alone and or lonely growing up too. I didn't really feel like I could get close to anyone. Parts of me knew they couldn't know the secrets, and the other parts of me that tried to make friends knew that we couldn't really hang out with other people because my mom simply wouldn't let me. She said it was dangerous to go over other people's houses, that if I wanted to spend time with friends, that I had to have them come over our house. So I did try that, but my mom had to be involved in every part of when my friends came over. So this led to my loneliness. My mom would tell me that I was her best friend, and she would want me to do things with her, and if I didn't, she would get sad and upset. I didn't want her to be sad or upset and switch and become angry, so I learned to do the things she wanted to do with her. I ended up spending most of my time with my mom, and she told me that I should never leave and move out on my own, that I wouldn't be able to hold down a job, and that the world was dangerous. My dad, on the other hand, finally did tell me during one of my mom's fits of rage that I should move out as soon as I could. So, the first guy that was interested in me in college, I married, and he helped me leave my house. Looking back, I didn't understand that just because someone liked me didn't mean I had to like them back. I was just happy that someone liked me, and I wanted to make sure he would keep liking me. So I tried to figure out exactly what would make him happy. I learned all these people-pleasing skills from my childhood. It is how I tried to keep my mom from hurting me, and it continued to bleed into all my relationships until I started to understand my attachment issues in therapy.
A lot of the work in therapy is unlearning and relearning appropriate attachment with the therapist. We had accumulated so many negative beliefs about ourselves, like we are too much and we are not enough. Or we are too selfish and we are bad. These are all beliefs learned out of relationships with others and attachments. When we finally got a boy to like us back when we were in college, we clung to him and married him. Yet those beliefs persisted in our relationship. No one else would want us, so we were stuck with him if we didn't want to be alone.
I grew up with the idea that once you're married, you stay married. You work it out. When I was little, my mom told me that if I got married, I needed to take care of my husband. I needed to cook him dinner and bring him his slippers and clean the house. So when my husband got mad at me, I immediately blamed it on myself. I wasn't doing things right. I wasn't being a good wife, and that's why he was mad. One day, he snapped. I still don't remember exactly what was so upsetting, but I think it was about the dinner I had made. Sparing the details, one of my protective parts, Feeny, came out and tried with all her might to forcefully get away from him. But he was too strong and trapped me in our bedroom closet so I couldn't run away. When he tried to apologize later and said he'd go to counseling with me, I couldn't. I didn't understand then, but now I know he had broken my little's trust for him. And that's what ended our relationship, even if I didn't walk out that day. I didn't understand in the way I do now that I had parts back then. But that's when one of my teen parts started talking to a woman online. We didn't understand either that we could have a relationship with a woman. We grew up with the idea that you would go to hell for that. So while we were talking to this woman, I didn't understand that a part of me was falling in love with her. And that what was happening between her and I online would be considered emotional cheating. Him finding out about our relationship ended our marriage. I moved out within a few days into my own apartment and was living alone for the first time in my life. It was the first time that I only had to think about me, and I realized I had no clue what I liked or wanted.
We too were taught that divorce would send you to hell and that being married to the same sex was somehow even worse than that. It is those beliefs that really kept us trapped in a terrible marriage and miserable for years even after we got divorced. Religious trauma is definitely a topic for another episode. Before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about our friendships and relationships today. Now that we are both in a much healthier place as far as attachment and trauma triggers go.
Yes, so thankful to be in a much different place now. It did take years of therapy and a few relationships to figure out what we needed and wanted as a system in a romantic relationship. I did find a very kind woman that we dated for a combined total of 10 years. I say combined because we did end the relationship at one point, and I realized the relationship didn't end up working for a multitude of reasons. But one being because not all my parts felt liked by her, and I think that's because she knew not all of my parts liked her in the same way. I knew it was complicated for a singleton to understand what was going on for me as a system, and at that time, I was still trying to figure it out too. Ultimately, I didn't feel like she was getting what she wanted from our relationship, and I didn't want to be the cause of her unhappiness. More baggage coming up from my past. But I have to say, as far as friendships go during my adulthood, they have been pretty far and few between. I have never felt like I could truly be authentic with anyone. The few friends I did try telling about my system of parts ended up being fascinated by me, instead of just being and doing normal friend things. I don't know, maybe it's not possible to be and do things in a, quote, normal way with a multiple, because, well, we just do things differently, which is quite okay. Things started to slowly change for me with therapy and when I got connected to our ever-growing DID community, almost entirely thanks to the organization founded by my very good friend Jamie of An Infinite Mind. I finally felt comfortable telling things to fellow multiples because I figured out that it wasn't weird or fascinating to them. And that has led to the present moment where we are basically telling the world our story. And gee, it feels a lot better to be open like this than be hiding, even if we might seem a little odd. I have developed love for myself and for my system of people inside, and it's nice to share that with everybody. My wife over here, Garden System, was one of the friends I made. The best thing about our friendship was that we have always been so open with each other from the beginning. And as everyone knows that's been in a good relationship, communication is key. Being my authentic, weird, amazing selves with you, wifey, is the highlight of my life.
Being able to be authentic with you is definitely a highlight for us as well. Having and developing good relationships has made all the difference. Connecting with our DID community was definitely a life changer for us. We had made a few friends over the years, but it was painfully obvious how different we were compared to others. We had dated a few guys off and on after our divorce, most of them before we knew we had DID, and the tumultuousness of those relationships makes so much sense now. There were adult parts that wanted to do adult activities, and then there were parts that did not want to be touched in any way whatsoever. We remember having a full-body tantrum when our then-fiancé tried to come and give us a hug. It's obvious now that a little was out at that point and was terrified of such contact. We did date this one other guy after our diagnosis and when we had a lot more awareness of all of us, and it was really difficult for him when we would switch to a little. Daisy woke up at 4 a.m. and wouldn't talk to him at first, but then asked for chocolate milk and to watch the movie Snow White. He ended up ghosting us completely shortly after that. We came to the conclusion that dating someone that also had DID would be much better for us overall. And turns out, it absolutely is. It didn't take us very long to fall in love with Drew here, and it just worked. The thing that really makes our relationship work is our ability to be open, authentic, and to never, ever have to hide who is fronting.
Right. And well, we've gotten so good at this, none of you need to even say anything. I pretty much always know which one of yous is there. And I love all of yous. The cool thing about being a couple of multiples is that we have multiple relationships going on between all of the parts of ourselves. Our littles are friends with each other and do kid things together. Our tweens and teens like hanging at the mall and spending too much money. And our adults get into all sorts of fun projects like creating this podcast and raising kids.
We know how important community is and how healing good, healthy relationships can be. And finding our people at an Infinite Minds Healing Together conference was instrumental in our healing journey. We know what a privilege it is to have access to an event like this. We are blessed to live right here in Florida where the event takes place each year. With all things on the internet now, there are more ways that we all can connect. Andrew and I wish to make that possible for others. So we are in the middle of creating an online community platform to bring together those with lived experience of dissociative identity disorder, their supporters, and also therapists who do treat or want to learn to treat dissociative disorders. All of us together in community can make a difference in the way DID is perceived and treated.
And we are so very grateful for you, dear listener. In this episode, we talked about all things relationships, including attachments formed in childhood, intergenerational trauma, friendships, romantic relationships, and our personal stories about all of these as multiples. We're going to continue these great conversations next week, and we decided it would be good to talk about challenging things that come up for multiples that might seem like ordinary things to singletons, like going grocery shopping and going to doctor's appointments and the dentist, handling our families of origin, and options for disclosure to your employer and coworkers when you need accommodations, and deciding how much to tell family and friends. We can't wait to talk about it all.
These typically mundane aspects of our lives can really become quite a challenge when you are a multiple. Between our outside biological teenagers and our internal littles, shopping can get out of control money-wise if we don't have a good handle on our internal communication. And even a trip to the dentist has the potential for serious internal chaos if we don't prepare everyone. We look forward to sharing some hilarious moments we've had out in public, pros and cons of disclosure, and some good tips to get through more challenging moments, like those dentist and doctor visits.
Thank you again for hanging out with a couple of multiples today. From your hosts, Drew
and Garden System, thank you for listening to A Couple of Multiples, the reality of dissociative identity disorder.
This podcast is intended for educational purposes and is not a replacement for therapy.
Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapeutic relationship with the hosts or any potential guest speakers.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear what you enjoyed the most.
You can visit our website at acoupleofmultiples.com for additional information and resources, and to also subscribe to our mailing list to receive future updates.
Remember, you matter and are loved for being all of yous.